Today on Co-op for Two, a spoiler-free review of War Story Occupied France. It's not for everyone, but is it for you? Let's find out. As a reminder, I have no relationship with any publishers of any of the games covered on this channel. I purchased it myself for about $55 at Gen Con. It's not yet available to the public, but will be so in October 2024, probably for about $45. It's co-authored by two people, Dave Neal and David Thompson. Dave Neal is well known to viewers of this channel. He created Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the Baker Street Irregulars box, my favorite box for this series, and a bunch of other mystery games, Perspectives, The Animals of Baker Street, Echoes, etc. And David Thompson is most famously perhaps known for his work on Undaunted, which is a World War II card drafting, deck building game with some light wargame elements. And he's done a bunch of other wargame adjacent games, Sniper Elite, some solo tactical war games, etc. So a real pedigree behind this box. You can watch us play through the full campaign, totaling about 30 hours, though that's full of spoilers. You shouldn't do it until you finish playing the game yourself. And this will be a short-ish review. If there's some interest, I will record a longer deep dive into the game and game design elements in a future video. So what exactly is War Story Occupied France? It's a cooperative solo game. You're always controlling a squad of 4 special operations people in World War II, dropped into France to help the resistance. No matter how many players you play with, you're still playing essentially a solo game, controlling 4 operatives. It's not based on real battles or real people, but it is set in the real-world context of World War II. There is a continuing campaign of 3 missions. You don't have to play them as a campaign, but you should. There is some limited replayability. Each mission, you could play it at least twice and see completely different things. Each mission will probably take you 2 to 3 hours. It is a true hybrid game. It is sort of half a choose-your-own-adventure story and half a tactical combat game. So I've said this is going to be spoiler-free, but I do want to show you the contents of the box. I'm not going to show you anything that you wouldn't get from the rule book. And so you've got 3 books, one for each mission. You can see they're quite hefty. There's a lot of paragraphs and decisions and tests in each one. There's this sheet of identical team sheets that you would track your progress on mission 1, then mission 2, then mission 3. There's 3 envelopes, one for each mission. These envelopes are large, oversized, mostly maps for combat encounters. So you'll have periodic battles, and inside here are the maps on which those battles take place, and an additional sort of briefing for each mission. We've got just a little disc that you can put tokens on to keep track of what tokens you have available to your team. We've got some cubes that are used to track enemies, the red ones, and various miscellaneous things that differ based on the mission. And sometimes you'll break up your team into groups and you'll use colors to indicate that. You've got pawns, 4 different colors for the 4 different members of your squad. And when we look at the rule book, I will show you how these are used to assign roles to different members of the team. we've got a secret little envelope that you only open after you finish the campaign or if things go terribly wrong. And then we've got some cards. These are actually 3 separate decks. You've got 8 roles that you can play. You'll always be forming a team of 4. I'll show you that in the rule book. Then we've got equipment cards. I'm going to show you the one that the game is going to tell you about right up front. It's just the silenced pistol. And basically these 2 symbols you'll see over and over again. One tells you whether it's a short-range weapon or long range, and one tells you whether it makes noise or not. And then there's just some flavor text. But here you'll have weapons that you get right at the start of the game, and then some items that you won't get until future missions. And then you've got this stack of cards that you'll be told when to retrieve them, and they could have all number of different things on them. But one common thing that they have on them is locations. So you may have a bunch of cards on the table at any one time, and you'll say, well, let's go over here to this building or let's visit this person, and the card will tell you what entry to read in the storybook. And then we've got tokens of various types, mostly these 3, guns, general advantage tokens, and skill tokens, and then a couple more. I'll show you when we look at the rules how those are used. So let's quickly go through the rules so I can explain to you how to play without revealing any spoilers here. Okay, so basic description of how your team works. They all follow the same basic plan. They've all got 5 stats, a firearm stat, and then 4 different skills. That's the only thing of import on these cards. The skills in firearms go from 1 to 3, and they're all a good mixture. You'll assemble a team out of 8 possible choices. Some of them just have their stats, others have some special abilities. None of them are dramatically different from each other, but different enough that they will affect how you play a little bit at least. Here is what I was describing about this stack of cards. You'll commonly get a card that shows you a location and then options if you visit it. And frequently those options will be broken up depending on what time of day it is. You can see on the team sheet that for each mission, you've got some tags, some letters that you can circle that keep track of certain events that have happened. You've got some objectives that you'll either succeed or fail at. And then you've got time passing that you'll keep track of. And time passes differently on each mission. In one mission, it's all one night, hour by hour. On the other missions, you're going through several days and day-night cycles. And then here, mission 3, you're going through many different time periods. Another thing you'll notice is for each mission, there's a tracking points or something similar that keeps track of how active the Germans are trying to trace you down, and that will have dramatic effects continuously. Okay, you've got a little description of weapons and how they work and various other demonstrations of cards. Sometimes you might get a picture to look at or various other clues or mysteries. You'll constantly, while you're making choices, almost everything you do, every turn, you'll read a short paragraph and then you'll either have some choices or a test to pass, a test of some of the stats here. An awareness test, an influence test, stealth, technical, or firearms. But the tests are not like you might be used to on a typical game like this or a dungeon crawler where you would roll a die and see if you're higher or lower. It doesn't work like that at all. Instead, the tests are varied in how they use these stats. So you might be told, pick 2 members of your team, send them in the back door, and then you might be asked, look at the lowest stealth number, or the combined firearms value, or the highest of this value, or add the highest and the second highest. That'll give you a value, and then you'll see if it passes the required amount. There's no dice rolling, there's no randomness, it's all deterministic. But when you get a test, you have the option of using tokens that the team might have. So you can use these skill tokens to boost up the skill values, these 4 lower stats of any team member to try to change the value. And then you've got the firearms tokens that can be used to change a firearm stat, but not a skill. And then you've got this clever thing of these advantage tokens, which can be used for either one, but are typically doled out only during these extended combat encounters. They're called advantage tokens, and they're doled out when you get a slight advantage during combat, and then they're taken away at the end of the combat, so they won't stay with you. And one of the primary tough decisions you'll be making as you play is when to use these tokens, because you only have a few of them that have to last, and you'll have to make tough decisions about when it's worth it to spend tokens or when you should just live with a failure, etc. Okay, little description of the team sheet that I went over and time, little description. Okay, so here are the encounters. Now, I have to walk you through this here because I don't want to spoil anything on a card. But these encounter cards, maps, are what you'll find in here. So you'll spend at the beginning of the each mission, you'll get an introduction, and then you'll go out and you'll visit places and visit cards and make lots of little decisions. And then in each mission, you'll have somewhere around 2 little combat-heavy encounters. And the game will instruct you to get out a map. It's sort of a tactical planning map. And it will happen in 2 phases. The first phase will involve assigning your 4 agents to these various tactical positions. They're lettered A, B, C, D. On each location, you'll be told how many agents, minimum, maximum, could be placed there. You're shown little cones showing their line of sight, what they can fire on. You're shown whether they're going to be using small arms or a rifle, what they can see. And then, in addition to this, you will be given a whole half-page verbal description of the different positions. Position A is a non-combat surveillance position. A person here will be able to see these things, and it'll describe it in terms of the encounter and the mission you're trying to go on. Like, the person here is going to be able to spot the enemy and relay it to these 2. Maybe after they're done, they'll be able to come help. This guy is going to be too far away on a hill to do anything, but he can do this one thing. So you'll spend a big chunk of your time prior to a combat encounter deciding who to put where. And the way you'll do that is by using these 8 pawns, 2 of each color. So you'll basically put one on the map saying, okay, the green agent is going to go here, and then you'll use the other pawn to say, okay, this is the green agent. And you'll do that for all 4. And in addition to that, this is all sort of prep for this extended combat encounter. In addition to arranging agents, you'll, at this point, when you have these combat encounters, divvy up equipment cards. So you'll say, okay, this guy's going to get the rifle, this guy is going to get this item, this woman's going to take this item. You do all this prep, and when we played, we spent a good 45 minutes sometimes just planning and reading the description of the positions and thinking back at things we had learned on our way here by visiting these places, intel we had gathered. And then once you get everyone positioned with the equipment doled out, you'll begin this extended encounter, which could take a half hour, an hour to unfold. And it unfolds in not like rules. It's not like you're playing this choose your own adventure game until you get to these combat encounters and then you just play out the rules, rolling dice and having battles. It's not like that at all. Everything is driven by these choose your own adventure paragraphs. So essentially, when you have these extended combat encounters, you'll turn to a certain entry in the book and it'll go through step by step. It'll say, first, we're going to do the person at A, and here's what happens to them, and they get their chance to make a choice about what to do, what to fire, or they take a test. Then it moves to B, and then maybe some enemy comes in. It's just every combat encounter thing, which is this extended thing that could last a half an hour, an hour, is handled by unique paragraphs in the mission book. You'll be jumping around as the battle unfolds. It's never going to follow a simple system or rule. It's going to be a unique, bespoke battle that unfolds based on the particular forces and choices you have, and sometimes to deadly effect. Okay, so that's the basic way you play, and then there are some other tokens that may come in at some point during certain missions. Depending on what you choose, you may get completely different battles. I would say for each mission, you'll probably get 2 combat encounters, and maybe there are 4 possible combat encounters in each of these, roughly. So you'll see sort of half of it. If you made different decisions, you might get some completely different battles that unfold. And there you have it, a little nice player aid at the back. So hopefully I've given you some feel for how it mechanically works, but I'm going to try to convey sort of what it feels like to play here. The game is heavily focused on these extended combat encounters. There is a main narrative story thread, which is interesting and fun across the campaign. It's mostly on rails. It'll basically turn out the same way at the end in broad strokes. There aren't different, like you might be used to in a choose your own adventure game. There aren't completely different endings where things turn out completely differently. Just little different ways encounters can end. And it does feel like making very hard choices in a stressful, tense, deadly environment. You really do feel like one wrong move and you're going to get people killed. And there is a real appreciation here of the cinematic. These battles feel like cinematic set pieces, and it can be quite impressive. The word that comes to mind when we play this is tactical. This does feel like a game that is about tactics. You aren't making really long-term plans, but everything feels like a tough tactical decision. What place you go in, what order, how you equip people, where to position them, when to use these tokens. It's all focused in on every moment, every turn. You're having to make a tough choice. I'm not sure we've played a game like anywhere near this where the decisions felt so tough so frequently. It's just constant choices and constant tests and decisions about when to use tokens and when to even do some optional thing, how to attack a certain problem. More than rarely, the decisions feel a little bit arbitrary. That is, they feel tough and weighty, but not infrequently do they feel like you don't have enough information to make an informed choice. But rarely are they obvious choices, and they're often gut-wrenching. Like you feel like, wow, things are about to spiral out of control if we take one wrong misstep. So the kinds of tactical decisions, sometimes they're done outside of these combat encounters. Do we want to approach in the window, in the door? Do we want to treat someone with kindness or with a threat? Should we use a gun or a knife? And then when you get into these encounters, you've got this whole planning step before you do the encounter, who to put where, what equipment they should have. Sometimes you've got multiple locations and you can't man them all, and you're trying to think, well, which one should I leave unoccupied? Am I not going to have a scout out here? And all of these things have repercussions. It's like a dynamic simulation There are costs and consequences for all of these, and they frequently ripple throughout. It's not just like a one-off thing. It's you didn't do this or you made this choice, and now that's going to come back several times during this battle. And sometimes it's a matter of deciding, is my team equipped to tackle this optional thing? You're creating your team in the beginning, choosing 4 agents to go in, and they'll have different skills, and sometimes your decisions are sort of tactically how to gain the intel that will inform future decisions. And then, in addition to these sort of moment by moment tactical things, there's a sort of a little bit of a longer range tactical decisions in all of these missions that might put you on a completely different branch of the combat encounter tree. You're not going to change the story so much, but you may decide, like, are we going to try to get this person by going to this oil field, or are we going to try to go underground? It's just, sometimes you're making these big branching decisions that will take you on a completely different combat mission. And that's where some of the replayability comes in, because you could absolutely play this again and make different choices and see the completely different combat encounters. And as I said, the other thing that you're sort of making choices before you get into these encounters, one of the things you're really doing is you're sort of making choices that affect what intel you gather that will inform how you tackle these combat encounters. So you're always thinking tactically, like, if we talk to this person and this informant, are they likely to give us information that's going to send us down this path or this path, and which path do we want to go down? So what intel should we be trying to gather, etc. So I've talked about how this game feels like a sequence of constant tactical decisions, but that's underselling it a little bit, because outside of combat, there are a large number of narrative choices, the kind you're sort of used to in a choose your own adventure book, except that they are frequently very fraught with sort of psychological, moral decisions and some real emotional decisions. They're tactical, but they're also like, do you want to kill this innocent person because they might inform on you, or things like that. And it happens regularly here. And when we were playing this, we got into moments where we were like, whoa, are we really going to do this? Are we really going to choose this option that feels like you might have a hard time sleeping at night if you choose this option? But on the other hand, you feel the weight. Everything is deadly here. And if you get into it, you feel the weight of, there's a war going on. We're special forces operatives. We cannot jeopardize the mission. It's all about the mission. It may be that members of our team are going to die. It may be that innocent people are going to die. You feel that weight on your shoulder to achieve the mission, and sometimes that means being pretty harsh towards non-player characters or your own lives. There are some really memorable moments in our playthroughs, and that's because not just how the battles unfold, but because of some of the situations that the story sets up and the decisions you have to make. When it works, it's really quite magical. And quite frequently, because this is set up as a campaign of continuing missions, you'll make a decision at one point. You'll tell you to circle a letter, or you'll meet someone or do something. You'll circle some letter, and it won't be till way further down the line, maybe in a subsequent mission, where you start to see ramifications of that choice. And there's a little bit of foreshadowing and worry, like what's going to is there going to be a consequence to what we just did? And what is that going to look like? And there's so much little dynamic, emergent stuff going on behind the scenes. This is all a deterministic world, but there's so many interacting little gears and levers that it's hard to see how the game is going to make you pay for these decisions and costs, and sometimes they come out and you can't help but be impressed that they've created this little mini simulation in this light game. So I think groups are going to be a little split by this game. There are going to be some people who really love it and have stories to tell about their playthroughs, and then there are going to be people who it's not a good match for. So let's talk about who will love it and who won't. I think certainly people who love this theme of fighting, combat in World War II, special operations may love this game, especially people who like sort of tactical planning and assault in a small quarters. I think it's going to be people who are okay with not having a detailed, flexible control of combat. This isn't like a war game where you can move tokens and say this person shoots here and this person and then actually run that battle. You don't have that kind of choice. You're very constricted here by the storybook. First, this person goes, here's the choice they have. Then this person goes, here's the choice between these two things they have, or here's the test they have. You don't have that much fine-grained control over what happens here. I think it's going to appeal to people who like the wargaming setting, but want a lot more narrative and story in their game. People who like facing these tough moral, psychological choices like me. People who can embrace the punishing nature of this world and of this game. Sometimes it can feel very brutal and unfair and harsh. And some people really don't like that. They want a much more feel-good experience. I think there's lots of ways to have bad things happen to you here and feel a little demoralized. I think people are going to like this who have a sort of attention to detail and can spend substantial amounts of time looking for tiny edges. Like, did this person say one thing a long while back that tells us a little bit, that can save us one token or push us in this one little small decision? You really, if you want to do well in this game, you're going to have to be looking for the smallest of little information and little clues to give you just the slightest leg up. And I think it's also going to appeal to people who are really excited about the idea of a completely deterministic experience here. No dice rolling, no luck, no drawing a card to seeing if you succeed or fail. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to plan everything out like a deduction game and anticipate what's going to happen. There's a lot of things that are happening outside of your control that look a lot like luck, but there's no dice, nothing like that. Perhaps the most important thing you can get out of this video is a discussion of who may not like this game. It's not a cheap game, so it pays to think about whether you might be in that category that will not like this game. I think people for whom this setting of World War II and really focused on combat, if you don't like that, you might not have a good time here. There is a lot of narrative, but it really is all in support of these prolonged combat encounters. So if that does not sound fun to you, you might not like this game. And if the idea of sort of doing a half an hour of planning where these four people go so that this combat unfolds in a favorable way, if that doesn't sound appealing, then I think the story elements here are not going to be enough to make up for that. And as I said before, I think people who really want fine-grained control over their troops and the fighting are not going to find that here and may be disappointed in that. Disappointed to have the story so constrain them into a sort of straitjacket of options. And people who don't like the sort of stressful, oppressive nature of being in war and outgunned and the underdog and bad things happening to good people. That's going to not work for some people. Given Dave Neal's pedigree, you might expect this to be mystery deduction heavy. It's not. It's very light on that element. There are occasionally clues to pick up on that will inform how you attack a problem, but really there's very little of that here. The storytelling is great, but it's not a mystery deduction game. And in a similar vein, one of the areas that didn't quite work for some in our group was there was a little bit of disappointment that there weren't more non combat ways to attack problems. So, those of you hoping to choose a team and play in a style that's like pure stealth so that you can avoid combat or use brains to completely circumvent this stuff. That's not going to happen here. It may tweak around the edges how you handle problems, but there's a lot of fighting and shooting in this game, and it's unavoidable. And perhaps the biggest issue here that may rub people the wrong way is there are a fair number of situations where you'll have to make choices that feel agonizing and can lead to very bad outcomes, where I think you could make a reasonable case that there's no good way, there's no way to have enough information to make a good decision. So you may get into situations, not infrequently, where you feel the game is unfair. Like, how could I have known that if I did this, this person was going to get killed and this was going to go wrong? Now, I think you have to play it assuming that you can figure out the right action to take. But in the end, you may very well feel like the game was unfair to you in certain places. And I think that reflects a little bit of the game design philosophy here. The decision was made to sacrifice some gamey fairness for some more realistic hard realities of war, fog of war. Sometimes you have to make decisions with limited information, and sometimes things go wrong. And that's the balance that was chosen here. Time for final thoughts. I rate this a 10 of 10. It really is a unique blending of choose your own adventure, constant choices, and these prolonged combat encounters that are combined perfectly, meshed together to create a kind of hybrid game that we've never seen before. I loved the choices here. Even I griped about a couple places where it felt a little unfair. But for me, the regular finding ourselves having to make these agonizing moral, psychological choices, loved it. And you do have to make tough choices. And then the combat setup stuff, the planning, doing a half an hour of planning, who's going to stand where, who's best equipped, what do we think's going to happen, all of that anticipatory, trying to predict how things are going to unfold, trying to figure out, let's do this one little tweak that will just get us a slight advantage. The discussions we had while we were playing and making decisions were really some of the best. And I love those moments in games where you sit, you stop, you say, wait a second, let's pull back, let's really think this out, let's really game it out and figure out how to best tackle this. Because if we get lazy, if we just say, let's just try it, very bad things will happen to you in this game. So it does feel like the weight is on your shoulders here. And the framing of story here, the personal aspects, the narrative storytelling, bad guys, villains, good guys, it's all here. And it does, again, help to make these decisions feel important and interesting, and you care about the people here. Then the capper to all that is that the fact that this is a campaign of connected games where a decision you make in an early game can come back to haunt you in a later game, that, and then the unique storytelling that happens where anything can happen really, because this is not a simple board game with rules that say, oh, we lost. This is a story where the story can do all kinds of crazy things based on the decisions you make. And the fact that it's this long campaign makes it feel like a legacy game where that gives every action much more weight. Because if you mess up something early, it's going to have cascading domino effects way in the future. So yeah, hard to say more about how impressive this is as a total experience in a campaign. One of the questions people often ask in a review of a game with limited replayability is it worth the cost? And I think only you'll be able to decide that. But I can give you some idea of how much play I think you're going to get out of this box that might cost you $45. I think if you play slowly, really take your time, you might get 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours out of each mission. That would be a 9-hour campaign, let's say. And I do think there's enough replayability here to play each mission twice, maybe, or parts of missions. So you might get 15 to 20 hours out of this box. It's not worth $45 only, you can decide. There is some talk about follow-up games in this series. I understand that Dave Neal and David Thompson spent several years on developing this system, but now that it's built, I do hope they make additional games in this using this system. I would be thrilled to play them. There are a couple of elements in the box, different team members that look like they might make this a more replayable game, but I think replayability is limited here. I think once you play each mission twice and see the main ways to attack it, you're not going to want to keep replaying this. Let me wrap up this review by giving you some suggestions for how you might maximize your enjoyment of War Story Occupied France. There are some errata, and the game could benefit from an FAQ. Dave Neal and Dave Thompson are both active on Board Game Geek. There's a section there for this game. You should jump on there, look for errata and FAQ. Regarding that, everything is logical in this game, and there are a couple of places that you should keep your eye open while you're reading through encounters and instructions. If you ever get to a paragraph that tells you to do a test of a certain group of agents, but it doesn't seem logical, like it tells you to test on everyone, but it seems like, well, this test should only be done by this one person. Keep your eye out for that kind of stuff. Use your judgment there. Don't rush through decisions in this game. Take your time. Spend a long time discussing decisions, especially the pre-combat planning stages. If you rush through this stuff, it will go by too quickly, and you won't feel the weight of these decisions. You have to play these kinds of games as if they were deadly serious, as if there is some little detail that, if you can recall, will give you a slight edge. And I would say probably take some, the long combat encounters are punctuated. You'll do maybe 2 of them per mission. If you get to one and you're not quite fresh, read about it and then take a break, step away, come back when you're fresh and play it. I do think you should play the campaign throughout as a legacy continuing campaign. Don't jump around. Don't replay each mission till you do great. Play it as a sequence, 1, 2, 3. The only exception might be if your first playthrough of the first mission goes particularly badly, then maybe just put that aside, replay it again from the start. But after that, play the 3 missions and play a full campaign, and then you can go back. Now, what I would say, though, is get into the habit of taking some photos of your state every time you have one of these big encounters, because the big encounters take a long time to run, and it's very likely that you'll want to go back and replay an encounter, but not from scratch. You may want to go back and say, let's see if we could do that encounter again with the same resources we had walking into it. It's the same people, same equipment, etc., and redo it. So I would, before every encounter, before every big prolonged major encounter, take a photo of all of your current state so that you can replay it. And I'm going to come back to a little psychological tip regarding those replaying in a minute here, but some more general tips first. I play a lot of solo games on this channel, and there are definitely games that feel like they would be fine solo, and then there are games that really benefit from having someone else to talk through and discuss with. And I think this is one of these games that really benefits from having at least one other person to play the game with. And it's not so much because of the tactical decisions. I think it's more for the fact that misery loves company. And there's some really deadly, unfortunate, stressful moments here. And I think if you don't have someone to sort of commiserate with and agonize with and worry with, you're going to miss out on some of the fun here. I do think it's worth doing a little bit of role playing your decision making here. Like, remind yourself of this real world context and how deadly things were and how life hung in the balance from some of these split second decisions and fog of war stuff. And take that seriously. Say, what would we do for real in this situation if we have to make this tough moral choice? Okay, so I wanted to make a point about replaying these encounters. When we played through it, we had one particular combat encounter that went really poorly, and it left me with a sort of bad taste in my mouth about it. I felt like it was a little unfair. We were unfairly punished. It didn't unfold the way I thought. Anyway, I thought it was a little unfair, and I felt a little bitter about how things had turned out. And we decided to replay it to see how things could have gone differently and try to attack it in a different way. And we did something that is a small, tiny little detail, but for some reason, psychologically, it made it much more enjoyable for me. And it may sound a little silly, but what I did was I said, we're not going to I framed it as if we were sort of time travelers going back in time to try to fix the time stream, fix what really unfolded and redo it. For me, that little psychological trick went from going and saying, well, we lost, we're going to cheat and go back, or we're going to go back, but it doesn't really count because we're just redoing this. There's no reason we're redoing this. It's sort of illegal. But I do think you could frame it. If you frame it as jumping back in time, then you've sort of made a second game out of this. The first game is you play through the full campaign just exactly as the rules say. You don't allow yourself to repeat battles and undo stuff. Don't do any of that. You need the weight of the cost of things going wrong. Don't allow yourself to undo. But after you finish the campaign, then you go into this stage 2 where you say, okay, now we're time travelers. We're going to go back and try to fix the time stream and do things differently. That made it fun for us. The other thing is, as far as advice for playing the game, it is a little odd that the rules do not include a way to adjust the difficulty, given that it's so easy to do. As you start the game, you're told how many of each token you start out with, a very small number. But I think if you're finding the game too difficult or you're playing with beginners, just make your own house rule, give yourself a couple extra tokens. In fact, I'll give you a little suggestion here. Just if you want to play on easy mode, give yourself one extra skill, one extra gun, firearm, maybe one extra advantage at the start of every encounter, and maybe when one of your team member gets killed along the campaign, increase those values one each. If you're the kind of person that doesn't like playing on easy mode, by no means, don't do it. But if you are the person that likes to play on an easy mode, wants more story, happy ending, give yourself a couple extra tokens. I don't normally talk about strategy in these reviews. I think part of the fun of playing these games is discovering strategies yourself. But I do want to give you some sort of broad stroke advice going into the game, especially since these kinds of things, you're really going to get the most out of it on your first playthrough. This is a very harsh world. There are things that are out of your control that you can't anticipate. But there is a real consistency and logic to the design here. A real consistency and logic to the nature of tests, the way they work, and the kinds of things that happen. Take that logic seriously. Look for little clues and traps that might lead you to make a decision that's a mistake. Look for patterns in the way the tests run. I've talked about how there's some interesting things that happen in these tests. Some of the tests ask for look at the whole team, look at the lowest value of the team, the highest value of the team, or the sum values of the team. Try to find the logic of that, anticipate what kinds of tests are done when, and use that to guide who you send on what tasks. And anticipate sometimes when there's lots of encounters here, lots of choices you'll make that aren't sort of, do you want to do it this way or that way? They have more of a flavor of, do you want to do this? Do you want to go do this optional thing? And you should think long and hard about whether the team you've built and the situation you find yourself in, whether you really should be going down that road trying this optional thing, or whether you're poorly suited for it. This game will punish you if you try to do something that you're not well suited for. So just keep that all in mind as you play. Okay, I hope you found this video review useful. As a reminder, if there's some interest, I will do a deeper dive into this game from a game design perspective. I do think there are some really interesting and important game design tricks and new ideas behind the scenes here that are worth talking about. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you on the next video.